Hello!
You always remember your first, or so people say. The first movie you saw at the theater, the first job you worked at, or even the first video game you ever played. In my case, it happened at a very early time in my life. A time of innocence and childhood wonder, when I was still untainted by the vices of humanity and looked at the world around me with curious eyes. But that was all to change once I discovered my parents' IBM personal computer, a fateful event that would dictate the course my life would take from then on. But what game was it? What piece of digital entertainment would forever alter my destiny? What evil media could possibly corrupt an innocent babe such as myself? Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't exactly remember which game actually came first. I mean, I played a lot of different stuff at the time. Simple stuff like Paratrooper, PC Man, or Snipes. But there was one game in particular that really captured my youthful imagination. One game that expanded my understanding of what a game could be. And that game was none other than Sierra Online's 1986 fantasy epic, King's Quest III: To Err is Human. Yeah, I didn't even start with the first game in the series. How weird is that? Anyway, I barely spoke my own native language of Dutch when I first played this, so understanding what this game was about proved to be a task akin to a praying mantis reciting the collected works of Shakespeare, so indulge me for a moment as I try to relay things from my perspective. You control some guy living in a spooky house on top of a mountain. Since me and my older brother didn't know any better, we just called him Larry, because of a slight resemblance to a certain other video game character we were familiar with at the time. I know, right? You could freely walk around the house, which in itself was a challenge primarily because of these staircases. You couldn't go straight up without constantly banging into the handrail or the wall, and even once we figured out we could walk diagonally with the keypad, you constantly needed to adjust where you were walking just to get up the darn thing. To do anything else, you needed to type in simple commands like open door, look wizard, or get broom. But as I already mentioned, we didn't know a lick of English, so we were pretty much helpless to do much of anything without our parents' help. Still, it was quite an educational experience that way. Seriously, I think I learned more about the English language by playing games like this than I ever did in school. Anyway, also living in this house was a wicked wizard. He liked to periodically scare the ever-living feces out of me by unexpectedly teleporting into the room accompanied by his eerie leitmotif. Jeepers Creepers! Then he'd just stand there for a moment to evilly stare at me before shouting something at me that might as well have been Latin for all I knew. And then he'd just poof out of the room again, and that was the end of it. Still, going about the house, there were some interesting things to see, like this mischievous little kitty that'd just wander around and glare at you. There was the dining room with a stuffed moose head on the wall, another obvious carryover from Leisure Suit Larry. There was the front yard, where some chickens were happily frolicking about, whom you could toss some feed and watch as they would gratefully peck it all up, which I love to watch. And last but not least, Larry's bedroom, where he could loudly take 40 winks with the best sound the PC speaker could manage. Attempting to leave the house so you could walk the treacherous path down the mountain was a futile gesture, however, because the wizard would somehow always wise up to your escape attempt and poof you right back to the house. If he really tested his patience by doing this repeatedly, he'd also put you through some sort of punishment, like hanging you upside down in the kitchen or forcing you to do aerobics. And that was about as far as I ever got with the game as a youngster. That is until my parents got me a subscription to Dutch PC gaming magazine Software Hits, and we got these dandy hint books from them. These were a lifesaver for me, because I played a lot of adventure games at the time, but wasn't quite able to figure them out yet at my age. And these babies contained walkthroughs for every major adventure game series you could think of. Space Quest, Monkey Island, Legend of Carandia, and of course King's Quest. So with these, and an improved understanding of the English language, I would take on the game once again with a renewed perspective. As it turns out, our hero is actually named Gwydion, and he's a slave to the wizard Manannan, who apparently resides in the land of Ludor and oppresses its poor citizens with an iron fist. He assigns you certain tasks, like feeding the chickens, sweeping the kitchen, or emptying his filthy chamber pot. And being an obedient little slave kept on a short leash, you gotta follow his orders, or else. Meanwhile, he's content to just teleport around and keep an eye on you, and when he's not doing that, you can usually find him up in the tower staring through a telescope and grumbling that the people don't seem to be doing what he wants. Alternatively, you can stumble upon him in his study where he's writing his diary?
Today I ate some oatmeal for my breakfast. It was flavorless and watery. I thought of my mother. I cried.
At set points, however, he'll decide to either step out or take a nap, which is when you can finally take action. Free from the wizard's watchful eyes, you can now head down the mountain, but carefully, because otherwise you'll plummet to your death faster than you can say deceleration trauma. Exploring the land of Ludor, you'll come across all sorts of interesting places and friendly people, like this welcoming committee here, who will kindly beat you over the head and relieve you of all your worldly possessions. There's also the 3 bears living in their happy little cottage, who unfortunately don't take too kindly to people sitting in their chairs, eating their porridge, and sleeping in their beds. Also present is a giant blue spider who hangs out on his web, strategically placed over a suspicious cave, and he'll gladly invite you over for dinner if you feel like getting to know him up close and personal.
Oh look, food! That I caught! In my web.
And in this desert area, you'll run into none other than Medusa. Yeah, you know the kind. Greek, ugly, snakes for hair, turns you into stone for so much as looking at her. Seriously, here you are just merrily traipsing along in the desert, and then she shows up and stones you before you even have a chance to look away. Mythological pain in my behind, that one. But as fun as it is to just wander about and get yourself killed in all sorts of amusing ways, you do have a job to do. Poking around the house in places where the wizard doesn't normally want you to, you'll eventually discover a trap door in his study leading down to his sinister underground laboratory. Just watch your step while going down there. Your goal in this part of the game is to use the wizard's book of spells against him, using whatever ingredients you can scrounge up to prepare several useful magical implements, like a potion that can transform you into a fly or eagle, a stone to teleport yourself to any random location, magic eardo that lets you understand animal speech, and so on. However, you need to be discreet, because Manananan will only stay out of your hair for so long before he returns home and starts ordering you around again. And if he finds that you've been a naughty boy and are carrying around all sorts of things you shouldn't be, he won't hesitate to reduce you to a pile of Gwydion dust on the spot. Doesn't matter if you're carrying around the wizard's wand or just a tiny pair of seemingly insignificant fly wings, if it can potentially be used against him, he will find you, and he will kill you. Just like that. So, you constantly need to be on your toes, hide all the important business under your own bed where the wizard won't look, and make sure that all of his own things are back where they belong before he can discover that they're missing. It's actually pretty damn tense, as the clock is constantly ticking and you're never quite sure when the wizard will return. Unfortunately, here's where the next major hurdle was for me. You see, back in the days before video game publishers hated their own customers with a passion and saddled us with diabolical DRM schemes, you were actually allowed to copy that floppy for backup purposes. However, to prevent people from passing them on to friends, relatives, and small furry creatures from Alpha Centauri, you still required additional materials that came with the game to properly play it. This usually meant looking up information in the manual, or using some esoteric contraption known as a code wheel that you had to spin to a certain combination in order to get a code to enter in the game proper so that it would allow you to proceed. As it happened though, we had a pirated version of the game, which didn't come with the manual, and the manual was necessary to complete the game because it contained all of the instructions you needed to follow to the letter in order to successfully complete the various spell recipes. Messing around all willy-nilly would get you nothing except for the spell hilariously backfiring on you and sending you on a one-way track to the game over screen. So for several years I was stuck just uselessly mulling about until one day my dad got us this, the King's Quest Collection. Finally, we had all of the original 6 games on 2 CDs, and with all of the relevant copy protection information to boot, allowing me to put that dang wizard in his place and see the rest of the game at long last. With the instructions in hand, the spellcasting section is actually one of my favorite parts of the game. It's very suspenseful as you try to follow each and every precise little detail, knowing that the slightest misstep will result in your untimely demise, while the clock is ticking and you have this nerve-wracking, not to mention ear-piercing, PC speaker music playing in the background. And it's actually a pretty immersive way of integrating the copy protection into the game, especially with how you dramatically type out the incantation for each spell. O winged spirits, set me free of earthly bindings just like thee. In this essence behold the might to grant the precious gift of flight. Your ultimate means of getting rid of Batman is by making him a cookie. Not just any cookie, mind you. A cookie made from fish oil and cat hair, the latter unwittingly donated by a local specimen, that when fed to the old bastard will permanently transform him into a helpless little kitty. Of course, just carrying around the thing in his presence is an instant death sentence, so instead you plop it in a bowl of porridge that you borrowed from the 3 bears and feed the muck to him at lunchtime, barely containing your sadistic glee as he unwittingly scarfs the whole thing down. Incidentally, if you know the exact steps to take, or if you're just that good, you can accomplish this feat in as little as 30 minutes of in-game time. But getting rid of the wizard looking over your shoulder turns out to be just the beginning, because going around Ludor with your new understanding of animalistic linguistics, you find that the local creatures seem to know a lot about you. In fact, overhearing a pair of squirrels reveals that Gwydion is actually Alexander, the son of King Graham and Queen Valenice of Daventry from the previous 2 games. Not that I knew at the time, seeing how this was my first game in the series, but yeah, this game actually was something of a departure from the last 2 and garnered a bit of controversy for not featuring King Graham as the protagonist, nor anything recognizable from the previous games, so this twist reveal that finally connects this game to its predecessors is actually kinda clever. A bit more poking around will lead you to a spooky oracle, who tells you that things aren't the happiest back home in Daventry. A savage 3-headed dragon is rampaging around, and your very own sister Rosella is now going to be offered to the beast to appease it, so you gotta get yourself over there fast if you want to save her and finally meet your long-lost parents. So it's handy that there just happens to be a ship at the harbor next to the town, and the sailors there are all too happy to take you aboard for a little compensation, except for the fact that they happen to be pirates and immediately chuck you below deck to feed you to the sharks later. Poor Alex just can't seem to catch a break, can he? But whatever, you just have to solid snake your way into the captain's quarters, get your stuff back, and then magic yourself off the ship as soon as you reach land. From there, you then adventurously trek through the mountains like you're some sort of hobbit or moomin, and along the way deal with an angry yeti even though you're fresh out of custard pies. But finally, at the end of the road, you face off with the ferocious 3-headed monster itself, and probably immediately get turned to ash and dust for blundering into its field of vision without properly preparing yourself. But if you are clever, you'll simply use whatever magical concoctions you have left to first turn yourself invisible, and then whip up a magical thunderstorm that leads to the beast's ultimate demise. So the day is saved, your sister is free, and you go home to the castle to be happily reunited with your parents at long last, and they all lived happily ever after. Well, until the sequel happens, but that's another story. And that, my friends, is my journey throughout the years with the first game I ever played and how I finally conquered it. And even now I feel it holds up pretty well. The graphics and sound are absolutely primitive by today's standards, not to mention the control issues and parser interface, but this game has lost none of the magic that it made me feel as a kid. It may not be my favorite King's Quest game now that I've played all of them, but it's still the one that I remember most fondly, being my gateway into the world of adventure gaming so many years ago. If you want to try it yourself, you can get the first 3 King's Quest games together in a bundle on GOG.com for a low price, but if you're repulsed by the age graphics and sound, then you're in luck because this game has not just 1, but 2 high-quality fan-made remakes available for free. One by Infamous Adventures, and the other by AGDI, who also did the excellent remakes of the first 2 games and Quest for Glory 2. But whether you play the original one or one of the remakes, you're in for a good time either way. Unless Mananan turns you into a snail, because that's just icky. And he's a slave to the wizard Mananan, who apparently resides in the land of Ludor and oppresses its poor chickens? Yes, he oppresses the poor chickens.